Thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me. Morning, everybody. I hope you've had a good start. Annette is a strong supporter, I know, of the sector. She is certainly one of the good guys on the opposition side for me, and regularly takes part in debates, as I do, supporting local government. And for the last year, I've been the Shadow Local Government Minister, building on my long-standing interest in local government. Localism is the fashion now, but I supported localism long before it was fashionable and embraced by all the main parties. And I've also long been a supporter of the first tier. When I was growing up, my dad was a local town councillor in my hometown, and now my mum is a local town councillor. And so when the lobbying ends here today, or in the meetings with now that I have, it carries on when I go home, and my mum tells me about some of the issues that her town council are facing and the impact of government policies as they are felt really locally. But I also work closely with the town and parish councils across my constituency of Corby and East Northamptonshire. It's an unusual constituency because it has an urban centre in Corby, but also a very large rural hinterland with 80 villages. And when I go around those towns and villages, I'm always really impressed by what the town and parish councils are doing. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that. Can I start by congratulating now on your hugely important role in establishing the Queen's Park Council and the Chadwick End Council, the first new parish councils for some years. In London, of course, there was for a very long time a ban. And I remember working closely with John Finley and others at NALC. I think around 5 years ago now, we campaigned to get that ban lifted and were successful. At the same time, we were campaigning to get the power of well-being extended to town and parish councils. And I think you're absolutely right in your manifesto to say that much more should be done to promote the ways in which the power of well-being can be used in the first tier. The devolution of power is all about showing that we can make things fairer and make things better. That's devolution from Labour. One of the biggest challenges we face is that many people feel that politics is too distant. They think they don't have enough power over their own lives and the places they live in, and that the government just doesn't trust them. It's one reason why town and parish councils are so important in bringing politics closer to people. And when Labour was last in government, there was a constitutional revolution, what leading academics like Vernon Bolton called the biggest constitutional changes that there had been since the reforms of the mid-1800s and the Reform Act. We introduced, of course, the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, Northern Ireland Assembly, and a substantial devolution there, and of course in London reintroduced an element of London-wide governance through the Mayor and the Assembly. But for me, English devolution is the big unfinished business, and it's why it will be a real focus of the next Labour government. The Scottish referendum showed, with that incredible turnout there, quite inspiring. I went up there to campaign. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity, but it was great to see so many people of all ages, in all communities, getting really engaged in politics and thinking about political structures, democracy, and where power lies and how they can influence decisions. And that should inspire us, I think, in England to really push ahead with devolution. And I thought, when David Cameron came out the morning after the referendum and made his announcements about English votes for English laws, I thought he'd really missed the point. Of course, if there is going to be, and there will be following the Smith Commission, further devolution to Scotland, and there'll be a pressure in Wales and Northern Ireland too, and of course Boris Johnson has been calling for more powers. Of course there'll need to be some change in how we legislate for England within Westminster, and that needs to be part of the debate. But it's only one part of the debate. A much bigger, livelier debate, a much more important way of engaging people is to think about how we devolve out right across England. Because there are already huge anomalies. We know about the West Lothian question, but some of you may have heard Hillary talking about what he calls the West Ealing question, which is that London MPs can vote on public transport spending and policy in other parts of England, but I can't vote on public transport spending and policy in London. So there are already very significant anomalies that need to be addressed, and of course there are ways to do that. This simple English votes for English laws, let me just say this on that unless you have a separate English Parliament and or a separate English government, it is very difficult to make it work. Because if you're having a dual-hatted Chancellor who's also the English Finance Minister and a dual-hatted UK Home Secretary who's also the English Policing Minister, when will they be acting in England's interest? When will they be acting in the UK's interest? And of course, can they only be English ministers that occupy those great offices of state rather than Scottish, Welsh or Northern Ireland MPs? So if we're not careful, we could get ourselves into even more of a constitutional wrangle. And so for me, it lies in looking at some of the really important proposals like a new English Ground Committee. But then we want to get on with our English deal, with devolution out to the English regions. And it's not only part of our answer to the political problem we face, the decline in trust that there is, but part of our answer to the economic problem. And I'm going to do a minute of being political, and I hope you understand that, because we're 5 months away from the election and we have an autumn statement today. The spending review will confirm that borrowing is up. For me, it's quite simple. This government inherited an economy that was growing much faster than other Western democracies, and unemployment was falling. After a global crash, which, let's be absolutely clear, affected every Western country, it's plainly absurd to suggest that Labour caused the crash. It wasn't Labour's spending on schools and hospitals that made Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac go pop in America because of the subprime mortgage crisis. It wasn't Labour's spending on public services, which you all supported, whatever rosette you wear or whether you wear none at all, you all supported, as did the Tories, right up to the end of the Parliament. Wasn't that spending that made Lehman Brothers go under and behave irresponsibly? And of course we could have done more, and of course we must learn lessons. We should have regulated the banks more. But David Cameron and George Osborne, of course, were telling us that we were regulating them too much. And what they've done is they have used that political narrative, that whole case they built, that Labour caused the global crisis, to argue that we needed austerity. And what's happened? Well, borrowing is going up, not down. The deficit is growing. And we've had 4 years in which our economy stalled, and we've fallen behind many other Western democracies, those that maintained a stimulus, that kept people in work, that kept people in their homes. And it will take a very, very long time to get us back to a level where we should be in terms of our economic output. And I say all of that because we now will inherit our own challenge around finances. And George Osborne will talk today about £2 billion for the National Health Service. David Cameron made some grand promises about tax cuts. But the truth is, it's going to be incredibly difficult in the next Parliament, and even more so because of the policies that have been pursued in recent years. The local government sector has faced the biggest cutfall. You know that. The government said that local government was the most efficient part of the public sector. David Cameron said that. But because partly their decision to protect other areas of spend, which of course is a nonsense, because if you allow social care to be cut, it has a massive impact on the National Health Service, as we're seeing all around the country. But because of the decisions they made, and because Eric Pickles was the first into the Star Chamber actually bidding up for a massive cut. Do you remember how proud he was when he got the first agreement? Local government's Dale has really dropped off the scale. And the Department for Communities and Local Government's own forecasts now are that Formula Grant, for example, will actually run out by 2018-19. That is the crisis that we face in local government finance. And of course, what's made this worse in many areas is how unfairly these cuts are being distributed. The most deprived 10% of local authorities are having their spending power reduced by 4 times as much as the least deprived. And the local government finance bill creates uncertainty about councils' future income. You know the problems that have been caused by the council tax benefit cut. I heard Annette refer to it there. And I've met with now and have pressed the government on the issues around passing that money down to the first tier. But you've been doing absolutely extraordinary things to respond in these really difficult times, trying to meet a service need where other parts of the public sector have pulled back or withdrawn, trying to help your residents. I'm really proud of the way that Earthdeborough Town Council in my constituency supported the local food bank, took the initiative to help make that work in their community. And there shouldn't be people going hungry in Britain in the 21st century, in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but that is the result of this government's policies, stopping support for the disabled, imposing a bedroom tax on veterans, taking army widows to court. That's the latest news if you read the Mirror today. Taking army widows to court over council tax arrears caused by council tax benefit cuts. And you see the effects of that very close up in your communities. That's why residents in Erkinborough wanted their town council to make a response. And ministers in Whitehall sometimes, I think, are far, far, far too removed from the impact of the decisions they make. And that's why they stand up in the House of Commons and just don't really listen or engage when they're told about the impact of the decisions they're making. You've been trying to keep local pubs and shops open. In Collie Weston, in my constituency, the community now run the shop and are doing really well. It's been really successful. In Denford, in my constituency, the community came together to buy the pub because pubs are really important to community life. You've been trying to keep buses running. In my local authority, we've had the biggest cut to bus subsidies of any county council in the country. And locally, our town and parish councils have been doing their best to maintain services. You've been lobbying us around the business rates and the role that you think you can play in promoting business in your community and your case for a share of that. You've been lobbying too for a share of the community levy, and I understand why you're making that case. What I would say to you is, if you want a blanket response from a Labour government, I think the challenge will be that actually town and parish councils are stepping up in different ways in different parts of the country and have a different response. And so in some areas, you're doing brilliantly in promoting and supporting business. In other areas, because of the character of your community, because of the priorities of the council, the capacity sometimes of the council, you're not able to make the same response. So for me, it's about, in the devolution deal that we're offering, the English deal, and I talked last time I was here, some of you will heard me talk about the architecture of this, the combined authorities and so on. And I'm happy to say more, but I appreciate it's a bit boring, the structural side to it. But in the combined authorities, which will work in county areas, we don't want devolution to just be about George Osborne going up to court votes on the M62 by signing this mayoral deal with the Manchester authorities. I want devolution in Northamptonshire. I want to see it working in Cornwall and Devon and Cumbria. That every part of the country should have the opportunity to take more power and funding locally and make better use of it. And we will say, when we agree the devolution deals with the combined authority areas, and we're not going to draw lines on that in Whitehall, tell you exactly what those should look like. It's up to local areas to come together as combined authorities. But we will say that then you need to set out here how you're going to make sure that the public can hold you to account. We're introducing new local public accounts committees. I think the first tier should make a strong case to say you want to participate in those local public accounts committees in some way. Just as actually scrutiny has been an opportunity in part for the first tier, we need to make sure that they work. And we'll be looking at the governance models, and we'll be looking at how combined authorities intend to pass powers down. So we'll be saying, how have you involved your town and parish councils in developing your devolution plans for your area, and how will you continue to involve them in the future? What role do you see for them? That will be a big part of our question to them. The English deal, there's a lot of detailed work done by Andrew Adonis, but there's also a companion piece of work by the Labour Local Government Innovation Forum that was set up and was led by Richard Leese, Sharon Taylor and others, and in which you asked me last year to make sure that the first tier could have a say, and I put that to them, and I know that we've given evidence, many town and parish councils gave evidence and took part in their work. And that's all about public service transformation. So our devolution is not just about economy, it's important though that is of course, but it's about how you pass powers down to transform public services in local areas and make them work better. We don't intend to get into local government restructuring, because when you look at that, and I've looked at the experience of that in places around the country, it's often difficult to realise the savings for a very long time. It can disrupt the relationships that exist between different tiers of local government in areas for some time, with an impact on residents. But even more than that, the financial saving is to be found in transforming public services in areas like social care, much more so than it is in a very lengthy restructuring of UK local government. So that for us is taking forward, do you remember the total place approach? But in that, this government took forward that at two levels. So there were the sort of whole place pilots, but also ones that were about looking at how money is spent in a particular place. And I think there's much more potential there for the first tier to get involved, particularly larger local councils. So actually, we want to say in the totality of public money that's spent in our area, we want to play a much bigger role in it. Neighbourhood planning, I'll just mention in closing, neighbourhood planning and housing, big part of our agenda. We want to take neighbourhood planning further. I think it's been really frustrating for town and parish councils. I know this from my own constituency the past few years, to be told, like so many other aspects of this government's rhetoric, to be told on the one hand that you were going to have a bigger say. That was the promise leading up to the last general election, that you were going to have a bigger say, only to find that in actual fact the ripping up of the current planning framework has created a developer's charter where they know that they can push things through, win on appeal, and actually you've been disempowered in the last few years. So we want to really try and make neighbourhood planning work. We want to double down on that in the next Parliament. We know that involves cost. We know that there are capacity issues, and I've been working with some of my local councils on this. I think the solution to that is, by working much more closely with your planning authority, be that district, county, or Met, wherever you are in the country, around what your role is and how that is supported. I think just one final thing to say is, I want to see your sector thrive, and I think that becoming ever more representative is important to that. You know, some of you that I've spoken to in the past, you know my strong view that as far as possible you need to make sure that there are elections in your area, and I know that that's a challenge. I know in my own area, getting people to come forward for election at any level of government can be difficult. I'm delighted we've just got 3 young people selected to stand in our next borough elections who are in their early 20s. But we need people who bring experience and enthusiasm and ideas of any age. People who, following retirement, want to get involved much more in their local community and have something to bring. Have a huge contribution to make, as do younger people, working people. So if the next Labour government can help in that task, then we will. I've seen some of the brilliant ideas in the manifesto. We'll do our best to support them. And if you want to just look at the commitment I've shown to the sector, you can look at the work we did on the local audit and accountability bill, where we tried to stop this meddling in local publications, where we tried to stop a really burdensome audit regime being imposed on local government. Actually, we won some amendments helped by crossbenchers in the Lords to make sure that the audit regime applied differently to the first tier, to make sure that there was a recognition that you're in a completely different place financially to many local authorities. And our work to help you modernise how your democracy functions. I've asked 4 times since I became a shadow minister, 4 times in Parliament for the government to allow you to use electronic agendas. 4 times I've been promised they'll get on with it, and we're still waiting. But you have my commitment that I'll continue to work very closely with the sector